Welcome to the Honest Field Guide podcast, a weekly show dedicated to winning in entrepreneurship. I'm your host, JinJa Birkenbeuel. I'm the CEO of Birk Creative, a leadership, brand strategy, and visual identity agency dedicated to helping scale brands and assist with their adaptability with the market. On my show, you get to eavesdrop in on intimate conversation with business leaders and inspired entrepreneurs, designed to give you tips and strategies so your own business can thrive. Subscribe and join me each week for laughter, inspiration, and honest stories. Everybody, welcome to my show, the Honest Field Guide podcast. My name is JinJa Birkenbeuel. I am your host, and I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I always say this, you could be anywhere in the world, but you've decided to come to my show and listen to me talk to my guests about amazing things related to entrepreneurship and small business. Please subscribe to my show, the Honest Field Guide podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you could leave a 4-star review, that would be even better. I think Apple is the only platform that allows you to leave a 4-star review. So please go there and do that. And thank you again for coming. Okay, let's get started. You all know that I always open my shows with conversations around why I have this person that I'm about to talk to you with and about to introduce you to on my show. So first of all, I want to just say in 2021, I attended my first Fast Company Innovation Festival. I was a winner of an innovation award. I won an award for Google. And then I was there another year. I won an award for Advocate Health for a really innovative, inventive, creative program in trying to help people understand about vaccines and COVID, things like that. I was actually there this year as a contributing writer to Fast Company magazine. And my articles that I share in Fast Company magazine usually are around topics related to business and entrepreneurship. If you want, you can search my most recent essay, which is called Employers Believe That This is the Age You're Too Old to Hire. This is why they're wrong. And this is actually an essay that I wrote that went viral. I mean, it was really my authentic story around my experiences as a young person and then entering into it as an older person in the business of advertising and graphic design and things like that. So check it out. Just go to perplexity.ai, Bing or Google, and you can find this essay. But anyway, so this year when I attended the festival as a contributing writer and as a curious-minded person, I decided to experience the festival in a little bit of a fresh way. So instead of going to the big talks where Manuel Miranda was speaking or Issa Rae, there was even a talk with Satya Nadella, which I actually did go to that one, but I really wanted to go to some of the more intimate gatherings of creative leaders. Like, for example, I got to meet Shauna Stevenson. She's a creator of Ellie the Elephant from the New York Liberty WNBA team. And then I got to meet one of my heroes. His name is Stefan Sagmeister. Oh my God, I almost passed out when I talked to Stefan. But at the very, very last minute, I decided to check out a talk put on by Darren McCoy. He is the creative director of Doc Martens. And I went to this little talk, and it was in, I don't even remember. I'm trying to remember like what the neighborhood was in New York, because there's so many neighborhoods. You know, I'm a Chicagoan, so I'm not like totally tapped into the boroughs of New York, but I went to this talk and it was like this, you know, I went in this elevator, I went upstairs. It was like this, I walked in this like really cute, amazing office with really amazing people. And, I was pleased to discover that the creative director of Doc Martens was Black. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Really? This is a shoe I've coveted since I was 15 years old. And I've never been able to afford a pair of Doc Martens, but just so you know, I actually did buy my first pair last month. But anyway, the talk was at SS+K, which is formerly Shepherdson, Stern, and Kaminsky, which is a prominent strategic communications and creative marketing agency. The office was great. Everybody was vibing, and the people that worked there were diverse, and including the CEO, who I was like, oh my God, she's a Black woman, recently appointed it. And I thought to myself, okay, what alternative universe am I in? And I was like, who is this woman? Like, let me go talk to this Black woman CEO. I couldn't believe it. Her name is Naja Bellin White. And I decided I was going to be friends with her forever. But the thing is, here's the thing. We're on the precipice of potentially electing the first woman president of the United States. And she's a mixed race woman. She's half Black and half Indian. And I always think to myself, you know, I think about one of the most famous quotes of all time by Malcolm X. The most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. And then I think about the famous poem by Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? Ain't I a Woman? And at the same time, we idolize women like Oprah, Kerry Washington, and Michelle Obama. They deserve to be idolized, of course, but we're at a crossroads, right? So as Elvis Presley famously sang, and I love this song, It's Now or Never, and he does a beautiful job of it. I really thought, you know what? We're at a crossroads. And so I needed to know, when I was in this office with this remarkably intelligent, sharp, smart woman in an advertising agency, which is an industry dominated, by, white people. I was like, okay, which man had the confidence and courage to hire Miss Bellen White in an industry with a long, storied history of discrimination, ageism, misogyny, racism, total lack of representation, except maybe the mailroom. And I used to be in corporate myself. Really total lack of representation from the creative table up to the C-suite. And this is one of the questions I'm going to ask my guest on my show today, because I want to know the answer, because he is a leader and can maybe help us understand how can we do more of this, especially because, like I said, where are we at? Where are we today? We're a few days out from potentially electing the first woman president of the United States, and she happens to be Black. Welcome, Lenny.
Hey, how are you doing? Well, it's great to see you, JinJa, and thank you so much for having me on your show. And before we jump in, I just want to thank you for being a powerful, smart woman who is spending her time talking to interesting people that inspire her, who aren't necessarily the most famous. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
I really have to know, because your last name is like the Rolls Royces of last names. Are you related to Howard, David, or the billionaire Leonard? Please tell me, Howard, David, or the billionaire Leonard.
No, I'm not related to any of them. And, sometimes when I would make dinner reservations, I would suddenly find myself getting the best tables and people getting very disappointed when I was not with Howard or with the Stern School of Business or so on and so forth. So I am from the very famous Stern family from Radom, Poland. So none of the above.
Oh my God. Okay. I couldn't resist. I mean, it's like, if you want a good last name, like, find a Stern and get with them. Okay. All right. So let me start at the beginning. There's really not a single personal story about you that I found online, right? Like, I feel like you've led a very beautiful and somewhat private life. I mean, you're kind of behind the SS+K vibe. I want to get a little bit more understanding of how you were formed, because to me, you seem like you have a philanthropic heart. You have some emotional intelligence. And this seems to be a through line in your career, right? So are you a native New Yorker? Where's your family from? Like,
Sure,
are you raised in a family of entrepreneurs, or what's going on?
Yeah. So I'm a borough boy, and Queens, New York, very proud and true. Rego Park, asphalt streets, PS 174, so on and so forth. So I'm a native New Yorker. But, the purpose and sort of the DNA of maybe the philanthropic references you make, like many of us, we all come from our lived experiences. And for me, my lived experiences come from my folks and my family upbringing. And forgive me for oversharing, but it really defines who I am and a little bit of our business and my whole philosophy as an entrepreneur. My dad was an immigrant. He was born in Poland. He was 15 when World War II started. He had 5 brothers, so he's one of 6. He was separated during the war. He ended up in Auschwitz and Dachau. 149823 tattooed on his arm, which is now tattooed on my ankle. He was liberated from Dachau at 89 pounds by a Black American tank commander. And when you go through any trauma, and we all have our own versions of trauma, you're either damaged and angry and immobilized, or you're damaged, and I like to say, uppercase C crazy or lowercase c crazy. My dad was lowercase c crazy. He wasn't going to let a moment like that define who he was and limit who he could be. He was passionate about living in the moment, making change, impacting the world around him. He came to America, met my mom, who was a native New Yorker, who was a social worker. He became a doctor. And for me and my sister, they were always, you're on the earth for a minute, make a you know what difference, find time to work with people you care about and respect, uh, and help people who are most in need. So for me, that was my grounding principles. So whatever I was going to do, I was going to find a way to make an impact and hopefully do some good with the work I did.
Wow. And so when you were a child, what would you think, what did you think you were going to be doing as you were going through elementary school and high school, with these grounding values? I mean, were you an artist? Were you a writer? What kinds of things were happening when you were little? Did you know exactly where you were going to be today? Some people do. Some people are like, oh, I'm going to be this, and
Yeah.
they became that.
Listen, and I admire those people. And I think if we're all
Yes.
being honest, they are a small minority. And most people don't know what the hell they're going to do. And that can be scary. That could be exciting. A big group of that people, frankly, I think get trapped in thinking they have to be something. And they're scared of the exploration. Again, back to my upbringing, my dad was a doctor, my mom a social worker, and often you come from immigrant families, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be these things. The thing my parents gave me, the greatest gift for me and my sister, was find things you love and make a difference doing it. And don't be afraid to explore, experiment, and fail and make lefts and rights. Yes, for some people, the line is straight, but for most journeys, it's a zigzag. And the thing that they always conveyed to me was spend your time experimenting, exploring, testing, learning, zigging and zagging, because then you can spend the rest of your life really clear about what your purpose is and why it is that. And that was the greatest inspiration. So a direct answer is no. I didn't know what I was, what was I? I was a passionate athlete that was, you wanted me on your team, but I was, because I knew the rules and I was a grinder, but I wasn't the most gifted, but you'd always want me on your team. I was a creative person. But really, honestly, the thing I loved most was people. I was a connector. I collected friends. I had friends from different groups. I didn't accept being an athlete or a stoner or an academic. I loved interacting with all of those people because I think when you do that, you expand who you are and you learn a lot. And I think one of the big mistakes in the world today, in politics, in entrepreneurialism, in business, is not embracing different people's lived experiences. And for me, in a microcosm growing up in Queens, there were Russian immigrants, there were, Korean immigrants, half my school was of color. That sort of, petri dish of mix was something I loved and embraced. And it was the thing that I knew whatever I would do would be involved people and connections to them.
I love that. So you said you were in school with people of color. What type of people of color? Back then, was it mostly
Sure.
black people or?
Yeah. I mean, my school, Forest Hills High School, was big and large. We had 3 sessions. We had, 800 to 1,000 kids in a class. Half the kids were black, half the
Wow.
kids were white. People came from Jamaica. They came from locally. They came from all over. So it was a mixture of everything. And for me, again, oddly, because my dad came from this crazy traumatic experience that can either turn you into a hater and a resenter, or, my dad would put me in the car and take me to Washington, D.C. to meet a righteous Catholic person who saved Jews. And he said, look, there were bad Catholics and there were good Catholics, just like there are bad Jews and bad blacks and good blacks. Understand people for who they are, which takes patience and it takes listening. And it's not simply putting people in boxes with jerseys on as we do today. So for me, that mix was a blessing and a gift.
I really love that because one of the things that I've learned with people is integration and diversity is so important. But I do think that people do have fear of a black face. And I mean that literally, like a person that's black, right? They look at black people and they're scared. And I feel like, your father didn't raise you that way. Neither did your mother. They didn't raise you with fear, which is in some ways when I've read about you, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, you have a fearlessness, which I think, starts with, the things you talked about in the beginning with how, where your father came from and what he saw when he was liberated, and it really did make a difference for what you're doing today. And I wish more people had that experience. And I don't know how to get that experience to people, right? Because when I think about even Chicago, people make decisions on where to send their children based on race. They really do. They decide not to send their children here or to send their children here, and to avoid, being faced with that kind of like self-reflection, which it sounds like your parents were like, don't ever be afraid to ask questions and self-reflect and look at yourself in the mirror and realize when you're right and wrong, and accept. And just like you said, there's good people and bad people, but everybody's not going to be bad just because one person is. And I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. The reality is, in this day and age, even as parents, we all do this. We want to protect our kids and take care of our kids and help our kids, and they fall. Oh my God, pick them right up. Trauma, tragedy, failure breeds resilience, breeds understanding, breeds a knowledge that no matter how tough it was, in my case, for my dad, he didn't let it define himself. He persevered. So it allows you to it liberates you. And it lets you understand, not to be trite, but anything is possible. And why not? Why not you? Whether you're black, white, red, green, brown, etc. And I think that too much of society today both lives in a bubble of protection and a bubble of comfort. I want to talk to people like me. I want to see people like me. I want to be reinforced in my social media. And I think some of the most successful leaders, politicians, humans, parents, and entrepreneurs are people who have experienced challenge, have experienced failure, who have pushed themselves outside their comfort zone, and embrace people with different points of view, who disagree with them, who might have a different perspective. People see the same movie, they see it differently. Listening, hearing, talking, those things benefit you in life as a leader, entrepreneur, as a human.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I do have trouble with that myself. I just especially if I'm dealing with someone that's full of hate, I just have really a hard time listening and understanding. But that's another conversation. I want to understand. So elementary school sounds amazing. It sounds like high school was amazing and diverse. When you were in high school, what were you doing? I mean, because I'm trying to get you to how did you end up in college? Like, where did you, you went to Yale, correct? For college?
No. I went to Brandeis College, Brandeis University, and University of Pennsylvania Law School.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
I taught at Yale.
You taught at Yale. Yes.
And I teach at Duke.
Yes. That's what it is. So high school to college, like what is the, were you?
I'll be really honest, because I think it's important for people to know all the history. I was a combination of a social lover of people, a bad athlete who was smart enough to people want him on his team, a student who loved to learn, but I was also a bit of a black concert T-shirt, long-haired, hang out with the burnouts, but I would go to class.
What year was this?
I was in high school between I graduated high school in 79. So I was at 9 o'clock, at 8:30, I'd show up my best friend's house. His mom, God bless her, would leave to go to work. And we'd turn on Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and ZZ Top and Kiss, The Grateful Dead, Leonard Skinner. We play a lot of music. We do some other things that are all legal now, and get very happy, and then walk to work, get the Knish at Knishnosh on the way. And I would go to high school, and all my other friends would probably stay on the corner and not go to school. I would go, and I went to my 30th reunion, and a couple of people came up to me and said, "What were you and Mr. Van Ora, he taught Greek mythology, talking about?" Because I would come to school high, and I would sit with
Sorry.
Mr. Van Ora, and he and I would be the only people understanding what we were talking about. And I got a 99 in that class. But all kidding aside,
But you're
I,
not kidding. But you're not
no,
kidding. Don't
I'm
say
not
that.
kidding. But I love life. I was living and having fun. I didn't really become a real student till college. To be honest, my parents just said, "Lenny, get out of New York, see something different." I ended up at Brandeis for like, I didn't go on 10 tours. I didn't have people write my essays. I just ended up, I did good enough to get in there. And it was there I started learning. It was there I started opening up my eyes to all sorts of things in life you can do and embrace. And it was there and later at Penn Law School where the learning happened. But for me, high school was more of a social explosion and appreciation and building my EQ, which, I'm not good at many things, but that's probably a bit of a superpower for me. And high school built that. And then I woke up and realized it was important also to study and learn and get different perspectives. And that's what college and later law school did for me.
Well, first of all, you said Leonard Skinner, so they're one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
So I mean,
That's
like,
right.
I kind of was shocked. I'm a little shocked by that. I mean, Pink Floyd is easy, Led Zeppelin's easy, but you said Leonard Skinner, so
Yep.
that says a
Yes.
lot about you, and I feel very warm inside
Yes.
because you
Yes.
said them. Okay, so college, it's interesting. You went to law school, and but you're in a creative space now. So what was going on for you in college? Because you said you didn't start learning until college. I would disagree. I know what you meant. I know what you meant. You said I
Sure.
started learning like, rudimentary book, like school
Yeah.
learning. But, obviously your upbringing prepared you to actually really benefit from everything that college has to offer. Like I honestly, like everything led you to that moment. And when you got to college, you suddenly blossomed. That sounds like my story. I kind of had the same experience when I got to college. I really figured out who I was and what I wanted and how I felt about things, outside of my parents' home. But when you were in college, and when you went to law school, what were you thinking you were going to be doing? I mean, you were
Sure.
social, right? Were you thinking like I'm going to run for public office? I mean, what was happening?
Well, what I began to realize when I was in college studying history and politics was, as effed up as politics is particularly now, um, I would still argue today and historically many wonderful things have been accomplished through politics: civil rights, human rights, healthcare, reproductive freedoms, um, the Marshall Plan, rebuilding this, alliances. So I fell in love with it. I thought, maybe again influenced by my upbringing, that you needed responsible leaders who were courageous, who would try to make change in the world of government, or else you're sort of leaving it to other people. So I fell in love with that world. My
Well,
dad got.
it also sounds like you had good teachers.
I
I mean, are
did.
you right? Because like I'm like, what class did you take that gave you this perspective? Like, I just had to stop you there because I know that you're there on your own, but you're also with you're in an environment of obviously critical thinking and people giving you various ideas and having conversations,
Sure,
right?
sure. There was a class I took of, in all things Southeast Asian history,
Oh,
and it's the history of Indonesia. And it was, again, different peoples facing a communist revolution. And what it taught me is, what we do as humans, as citizens, matter. And our vote matters, activism matters, and it can change history. It changed history for that country when it went from Suharto to Sukarno and this and that, not to get down a rabbit hole there, but it opened up my eyes that what we do every day can make a difference, even if you're not famous, even if you're just a single person. In our country, whether you're Rosa Parks or whether you're walking across a bridge and standing up to Bull Connor, or you're standing up to apartheid or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, like, we can all make a difference. And that class sort of brought that to life to me from a totally different world. And I realized, hey, I'm living in a place where lots of change is going on. And, just from a little practical point of view, my dad got sick during college and I was on work study. And my job was to drive my shitty little car and pick up alumni. I'm very proud. My car was tied together with a bicycle bungee to keep the doors going. But I picked up a congressman who named Stephen Solars, who's no longer alive. He was an alumni. And I picked up his wife and him for a weekend during alumni weekend. And I had applied for a job for him and got rejected. And that weekend, he sat in the back seat. He was, somewhat interested in me, but not really, ignoring me mostly. But his wife talked to me the whole weekend, and I talked to her. And at the end, Nina leaned over to Steve and said, "Steve, you're hiring Lenny as an intern this summer." And so I got my first job working in a congressman's office. I fell in love with the idea of trying to use law and policy and issues to solve problems, excuse me. And that began my passion. And I didn't say I'm going to go work in politics or I'm going to run for office, but it seemed interesting to me because it involved people and understanding their problems and listening. It involved developing solutions. It involved advocating and bringing people together. And I became really passionate about it. And it led me, because of those relationships, to a presidential election, and my first job after college. And so, I thought I would, make change that way. And I thought maybe I'd run for office, or maybe I'd be in government, or maybe I'd use what I've learned to solve problems in different ways. So, yeah, that was my sort of moment in college.
I love this because I do feel that young people are gravitating, towards finance and money, not so much public service or government service. And it does worry me a little bit. I feel like people like you, if you were born today, because you like you said, you have high EQ, you're very curious, you are great with people. I feel like people like you today might not go towards politics. You might actually get swallowed up into the corporate sector. And that concerns me because I feel that some of the greatest minds I've come across, and I'm not saying there's no great minds in politics, but some of the greatest, smartest, most interesting, divergent thinkers I've ever met are not in government, and they should be, but they're not.
Yeah, listen, I think you're right. And I think that's sad because when you create an environment like it is today, it's not such an appetizing idea because you bang your head against the wall. You don't think you can get things done. You're dealing with such polarization. But I'm an optimist and I'm an entrepreneur, and I don't accept that as a forever truism.
I love you for that.
I think it's a moment in time we got to change. I will say, and we can talk about this when we continue our conversation. I do believe the lessons I learned in politics and sort of the strategies I learned in politics are very, very, and more than ever, relevant to being a successful leader in business, an innovator, an entrepreneur. But we can talk about that. But yeah, my first love was politics to change the world.
I mean, I love politics too, and I never could figure out how to bring them both together until I started doing some work for some corporations, and I was understanding, how to, create listening strategies so that they could get what they needed. But I want to just circle back a little bit. So you worked for Walter Mondale, which is amazing, who also happened to select a woman running mate. You know what I mean? And you helped one of my favorite presidents of all time get elected, Bill Clinton. I still love Clinton. I love Hillary. They're two of my favorite politicians in the whole universe. And then, of course, you were on the ground with, President Barack Obama, right? And I do want to talk about that later. You got in this opportunity because of the wife of an elected official, which I think is great. Hail to all the awesome women out there. You didn't seem to start at the bottom. Like, I don't know, like you didn't, it didn't seem like you climbed your way up. Like, it's almost like when I interviewed Ray Chu a couple weeks ago, who was 6 years old. He's the music director of Dancing with the Stars. At 6 years old, he was a prodigy, and he was picked up at 6 and just catapulted and never looked back, like to all these amazing opportunities. Is that what it was like for you? Like, were you just,
No,
am
absolutely
I
not.
wrong? It seems like you just were
Yes,
like a superstar from the
I have
beginning.
to correct you.
Oh no, do correct me then. What is going on?
I'm far from a prodigy.
You
I
are a
started,
prodigy.
no, and it's one of the great things about politics and political campaigns, and why I think it's a great breeding ground for any human development. And it's also connected to being an entrepreneur. There's an incredible opportunity to one day be cleaning the toilets, one day be setting the table, one day making the food, and the next day you're running the restaurant. And I was given a car and paid $15 a day as a field organizer. And I was sent to Maine, to the Maine straw poll, to work with Joe Trippi to help organize for Mondale before the campaign even started. Then I moved to Iowa and I was a field organizer. And then I traveled 18 different states before the convention. Um, and I was a field organizer. And at first I was paid $15 a day. And later a little bit more than that. But the more you did, the more responsibility you got. And I ended up helping run Pennsylvania in the general election. I was lucky enough to help run the convention floor in San Francisco, where, as you said, Congressman Ferraro was chosen as the vice president. I traveled with her in Pennsylvania. She was smart and punchy and had a point of view and was totally unassuming. I traveled with her to a speech and I was prepping her in Pennsylvania, and she said, "Okay, Lenny, we got the speech down. We have to stop at Kmart. My stockings have run, and you're going to go in and get me new stockings." And I said, "Awesome." And then I came back and I go, "What size are you?" And she said, "Oh, don't worry about it, just medium." And no, I started at the bottom proudly. But for me, if you're going to be successful in anything in your life, you have to understand every step of the way. If you don't understand a phone bank and door knocking and a volunteer and letter writers, and then you can't understand writing a speech or organizing an event for a candidate or developing the advertising. So for me, the best entrepreneurs are people who've gone from top to bottom. And my political experience allowed me to do that.
I love that. So, at some point, and you, as you were, grassroots organizing back in the day, um, where did the spark come for you to say, how do I make that? Like, where did the spark come where you said, oh my gosh, I am an entrepreneur? I mean, this wasn't a word that existed back
Sure,
then, right? It didn't
sure.
exist, but where did the pivot come? Because it's most people can't get from what you did to like starting a company like you did, which is absolutely super incredibly phenomenally
Sure,
successful.
sure. I think a couple of things. One is there's a couple of pieces or chapters in my mind to being an entrepreneur, or characteristics. You know, One is being fearless and not being afraid of failure and not being afraid of taking chances. One is really having a passion and a purpose and the courage to pursue that. And again, much of that came from my upbringing and a little bit of who I am, nurture and nature, and my parents' experience. But working on a campaign in many ways, every state you would go in, you were developing a startup. You were developing a new business. You were setting up an office, finding the volunteers, figuring out where to go. So you were sort of creating and building. So that I didn't realize that, but I was learning that and I was not afraid of it. Throw me behind into Michigan? Great. First Jew in McCurtain County, Oklahoma? Great. There's no black organizer to go to the churches in Chicago or Philly. Send a little kid from, Queens. Great. So that sort of experience builds muscle to believe you can do things and set things up and so on and so forth. So for me, then after politics, I went to law school because I wanted to like work my brain, and I went to Penn Law School, and I ended up going to Paul Weiss litigation firm in New York, great firm, and Ted Sorensen, famous speechwriter for John Kennedy, was my mentor. And one Friday, 9 months in, I walked in his office. I said, "Mr. Sorensen, can we talk?" He said, "Yes." I said, I'm leaving. And he said, yeah, it's Friday. I'm leaving too. And I said, I'm not coming back up because I missed the world of politics, the speed, the creativity. And I went to a political consulting firm. And I tell you that story because my entrepreneurial spirit was just because I went to law school and I was making this amount of money, I wasn't afraid to say, I'm not happy. This isn't exactly what I want. I want to go pursue my passion. So I completely switched careers. And then after a number of years at that political consulting firm, Rob, Mark, and I, Rob Shepherdson, Mark Kaminsky, and I, three best friends, decided to start SS+K because we weren't afraid of zigging and zagging and leaving a high paying job and starting with nothing and no clients because we had a passion and purpose. We had some fearless attributes to us. And that's sort of what gave us the drive to do it. I will also say finding your tribe is a really important part of being a successful entrepreneur. And, I'm from Queens, Mark's from Iowa, Rob's from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We each have different superpowers. Rob led a lot of our Obama work. Mark is a brilliant writer. I brought something else to the table and we weren't jealous about that. We embraced the different capacities and we knew together we would be better. So I guess what led me to want to start something and think I could was how I was brought up, my experiences in an entrepreneurial world of politics, and having an idea of what we wanted to do, change the world by combining political strategy with creativity and storytelling, and having partners and people with different lived experiences who would complement my skills.
I love this because it takes a creative thinker and a critical thinker to see what you did as a community organizer and how that actually looks like startup and entrepreneurship. I mean, most people don't do that. So when you started the company with your partners, you're lucky to have found these amazing people that you get along with, right? And that you can hang out with and go to dinner and spend your time with your families. I'm sure that's what it is because you wouldn't have been together for 30 years if that wasn't the case. But were you like the first, was your company sort of like the first type of company to do that? Because I feel like when I was researching,
Sure.
I'm like,
Yeah.
who else was doing this? Because you got written up in many, many books. One that I'll just, say out loud was the Alpha Dogs, the Americans who turned political spin into a global business. Like that made me think there was never anybody like SS+K before.
Well, look, what's the great line? I'll butcher it. We all stand on the shoulders of others before us.
Yeah.
And people have done that in much more important fields than mine in civil rights and human rights. But it applies to me and my partners. So the answer is kind of no and yes. No, in that when I left law school and went back into political consulting, I went to a place called Sawyer Miller, which is featured in that book, as are we. And Sawyer Miller was developed by a guy named David Sawyer, a political documentary filmmaker and political strategist, and Scott Miller. David's no longer alive. Scott Miller is still alive and brilliant. Both of them were mentors to the three of us. Scott came from advertising. He did some of the most famous Coke commercials. He got frustrated in just working in the world of advertising. David felt like just working in the world of politics wasn't enough. So they began toying with this idea of taking the lessons from politics, combining it with creativity, and taking it into the world of businesses and such. But often, the next generation, which in some ways Rob, Mark, and myself we felt like this is a good idea, but if we're going to really do it, let's really do it. Let's embrace storytellers from digital, from design, from PR, from earned media. Let's really work not just on public policy issues, but on, helping brands manage change. And whether it's Iceland marketing tourism during a pandemic, whether it's Delta repositioning itself out of bankruptcy, whether it's JP Morgan bringing its social impact and community investment to life. We really wanted to do it. So we left. So the answer to your question is others were doing it and experimenting with it. And we felt we had something to say about it. And we went and did that. And to be honest, we weren't going to sell more potato chips. Other people did that better. But if you're a brand going through change, launching a new product, reaching a new audience, bringing your purpose to life, navigating the political world, bringing to life your values to your people, those were the juicy assignments for brands or mission-based organizations, or for the occasional political candidate we wanted to do. Um, so we weren't the first, but I'd like to say we were along a line of people who now have certainly, many people have embraced that.
Well, speaking of firsts, President Barack Obama. So I feel like he was your first black customer, possibly. I mean, he was a big one. Like, and I say that because honestly, I mean, really, just a lot of companies, they have trouble with, they don't necessarily want a black client. Now, I know he's not a normal black client, but I'm just saying. I mean, what was it? You know, how did that come about? And I mean, I don't want to diminish. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, he's your first black customer. Like, I don't want to make it sound so small, because that's. I mean, there's a little bit of a kind of a joke in there, a little bit, but like, you know what I'm saying? But like, how it might. He's big time. Like, he's big time, and he happens to be black. It's like, oh my God, how in the world did you land a client like that? Like, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't want to sound silly and say, what are you kidding? We've had many black clients, which we have. Just FYI.
Before him?
Yeah, sure. Look, one of the most who's still alive, most formative figures in my life was a guy named Harvey Gantt, former mayor of Charlotte, an entrepreneur who built his architecture business. And he was the most compelling human I met at that time in late 80s, when I was working with Mandy Grunwald, and we worked on his Senate campaign against Jesse Helms. And I was enthralled by him, not because he was black, obviously, because he was a leader, because he had empathy, because he had understanding, and he was a communicator. And honestly, early in our lives at SSK, one of the most impressive corporate leaders I ever met was someone named Lydia Marshall, who was one of the top people at Sallie Mae. Now, she was a brilliant leader. She happened to be black. So I laugh because we've been fortunate enough to have many people of different backgrounds.
And I love that, because I feel like, understanding national black leaders, working in black grassroots communities, listening to black progressives. I mean, like, all those things had to have fed into, how successful you were able to work with, the entire, Obama circle of amazing genius, right?
And I know you know this.
And thanks for correcting me.
Oh, no, it's not correcting. It's important, though, for people who happen to be listening. It's like, I hope we all take the view of, it's not about working with black leaders or brown leaders or whatever. It's working with leaders who inspire you, you believe in, and not feeling like they have to come looking like one package.
It's also, Lenny, about, before that even happens, having trust and understanding and openness and not judging before you even get to that place. And I guess that's
not
kind
making
of
assumptions of what they are.
That to me is the difference between you and many other people in this business, is that you're not coming to a relationship with this fear.
You mentioned we were fortunate enough to do some stuff on the Clinton campaign, and we're big fans of both the former president and the former Secretary of State and the one who should have been president,
Yes,
Hillary Clinton. But, honestly, we were debating, we weren't every day in the political business, but we would work on certain aspects. We had a particular strength in youth and targeting young people. And Rob Shepherdson, I give him all the credit here. He sort of started saying, we got to check out this Obama guy. And because of relationships we had built from the past, there's a guy named Mark McKinnon, who both Rob, Mark, and I worked with at that Sawyer Miller firm and stayed connected with. And he was the one who, Mark McKinnon, introduced our firm to Livestrong. And he introduced Rob and then us to David Axelrod. And they were looking for
I
a
love David.
youth-oriented agency. And, in some ways, part of being an entrepreneur is seeing around the corner. In this case, but particularly Rob, saw around the corner and said, there's something here. And we were fortunate enough to get involved on that team. And to be very clear, there are a lot of people behind the magic of Barack Obama. We were one small part. We were the youth agency of record, very proud of that. Um, and it was inspiring, and it was transformative, and it helped us learn a lot of lessons we apply to business every day. But for him, he's someone who transcends his color. He transcends sort of pretty much everything, because he's an amazing communicator. He's an amazing thinker, and he has great values. Not perfect, and he embraced people who checked their egos at the door, who all knew their role. And we were lucky enough with Rob's leadership and other people at the agency and a bit of mine to be involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, no drama, Obama.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
he's something else. And I love that you brought up David Axelrod. He's one of my favorite people, Chicagoan. He was instrumental in getting the first black mayor elected in Chicago, Harold Washington. So he's brilliant. He's a brilliant person.
He's a brilliant thinker and has a ton of integrity.
And I love that I love that you brought him up, because I was going to bring him up anyway. So I just feel like,
well, just interesting. I brought him just to show you how politics connects to business. I brought him to speak to one of the biggest banks in the world from Australia, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and he spoke to the board not just about his prognostications about the election in that time, 2020, but he talked about the lessons you learn in politics and how you apply it to business. And that, again, is a through line to what makes our agency, SS+K, part of the M&C Saatchi network, a little bit different.
I love that. So I want to, get back to your CEO. So in our business, sure. And I'm in the business much, smaller scale than you are, but in the business of advertising, there's just so few Black people in the space, right? And we're sitting here right now talking about Black people and leadership, which is beautiful. But when you get into the corporate space, it feels it's more hidden, and so more things can take place or not take place. I wrote an article in Campaign USA a while back called "Where Are All the Black-Owned Creative Agencies?" And I even wrote about efforts to not include Blacks in high places, design spaces, for a number of reasons. You had the courage, and you have a lot of courage. We're spending a lot of time talking about this. You decided to bring a Black leader to your organization, making really big decisions. She's a woman, Naja Bellin White. She's the chief executive officer of your company. And, you always hear this like cliche, oh yeah, we just hired the best person for the job. Yeah. It's like, no. If it was that easy, we would have so many more Black people, you know what I mean? Like running things. So I'm going to be just very, very blunt and just ask a very blunt question. What can you tell other white male leaders about your experience hiring the best person for the job that happens to be a woman and Black, right? And why does it matter? Why is it good for business, especially now, to hire women to lead, right? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm going to start with something I referenced before, which I think is one of the most important human qualities in relationships, in business, and leadership, which is self-awareness. And when young entrepreneurs or old entrepreneurs are looking to bring on colleagues, partners, or new bosses, or the next generation, self-awareness is the hardest thing for particularly founders to sort of embrace. Know what you're great at, be proud of what you've done, but realize where you still need to go. And I think the number one thing I would tell people looking to bring on the next sort of generation of leadership, be self-aware of what makes your company special. What are the kings and queens that are important to protect, the values, the purpose, etc. But also be self-aware about what you don't do as well, or where the world is going. What do your clients want in the future? Not when you started the business. And what type of lived experiences does the leader you want to hire need to bring to the table? And just because it all worked for you your way based on your lived experience. And the scrambled eggs worked with me, Mark, and Rob, and all the wonderful other people we brought in. Don't be afraid of recognizing you have to add different ingredients. Um, Not because you want to check a box and look cool to the public or fulfill some sort of thing, but to be the best version of what you need to be in the future for your clients. And for us, we realized that if we didn't go outside our comfort zone, find someone who had different experiences, worked abroad, worked in Africa, worked in London, worked in digital, worked in consulting, worked in pop culture and entertainment and publishing advice. If we didn't bring a person like that, we would just keep being what we are, which is lovely, but not where we need to go to grow. So I would say it's less about courage. It's more about, there's a Yiddish word, first time on your podcast, called sachel. It's intelligence. It's EQ. It's like, what do we want and need to be the best version of ourselves in the future, not the same version. And if you start there, for us, it led to that criteria led us to all sorts of interesting people, black, white, green, yellow. And it became less about the courage to hire a black woman. It was more like, let's not have the stupidity not to hire the person who's going to push us and bring these different experiences. And in that case, it made it in some ways easy.
I love that because you're like, we're not going to be stupid. He's just like, this would be so stupid to not hire this amazing woman that happens to be black and she happens to be a woman. I mean, I love it. And we need to bring that forward with us as we're heading into November 5th, that we need to make a smart decision. I do have some rapid fire questions. And I swear to God, if I had another half an hour with you, you know what my number one question would be? How in the world can a Democrat, work in a company if they're full of Republicans? But that's another conversation. Like, I'm not going to ask that right now because that will take me down a rabbit hole of. So, okay, a couple.
The only thing I would say is we should all be in companies and friend groups and dinner tables where we can be different, can have different views, but not hate each other for it. And the world can't be where fake news and extreme conspiracies and hateful demonization is what defines us. If we got rid of that, we could all disagree about issues and policies.
You're absolutely correct. And right now, it's difficult to be at a table with conversations because we're in that moment. It's not where it used to be, where you could sit at a table and agree to disagree, right? So it's a tough time. It's a really tough time right now. Okay, so I've got a few questions I want to quickly go down the line and see if you can answer as quickly as possible. What are you doing right now to help Vice President Kamala Harris get elected?
I am praying. Yes. I am making sure I vote. I'm knocking on doors where I can. I'm encouraging people to canvass. We were, as an agency, very involved in the convention. And there's a great article that Rob wrote about sort of him being on the ground and sort of architecting and supporting the group that did all the videos for the convention and helped define that. And our work was part of that as well. But now it's sort of, the work is the grind. It's the phone calls. It's the data outreach. It's the ground game. And, if I would say to people, go to Pennsylvania, knock on some doors, go to Nevada, go to Michigan, try to do that, make phone calls, because that's what it matters. And of course, vote.
I love it. Which political leader was the hardest on you and your ideas early in your career? And this person, I'd want it to be someone that if they weren't hard on you, you may not be the person you are today.
I'd probably say Ed Rendell. Who was mayor of Philadelphia and then governor of Pennsylvania, a fabulous man, passionate. It wasn't difficult, hard, bad person or unfair. He just was a passionate, driven, uh, energy beyond belief. So you were a young 20-something-year-old going nonstop. And the thing, sometimes in campaigns, even ones that aren't going well, you show up and there are 1,000 people there and it's energizing. And sometimes you show up, there are 2 people there. The thing about Ed is every time he brought it like there were 1,000 people in there. And it was a great lesson. It was a great lesson to uh, respect everybody and everything, every moment, even when it's not going well, because one day it will, and that's who you are. And it was, and I ironically, myself and one of my partners, Rob, we just went down and taught his class at Penn and saw him, and he's still kicking and yelling and screaming.
I love it. I love it. So my last question is, this is an easy one, right? This is going to be so easy for you. What is your local go-to for an Italian dinner in New York City?
I have 3 answers. One, if you want to explore like a really great new one, that Lilia in Brooklyn. 2, if you want a forever awesome one, L'Artusi, 10th and Bleecker. And 3, if you want really good pizza, Mama's 2 on 104th and Broadway.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I tried to get into Latusi's when I was there for the Fast Company Innovation Festival and I couldn't get a reservation.
Just here's the secret for everybody listening to the podcast. Just show up and eat at the bar. It's charming. You're going to meet great people and the food is awesome.
I love it. That's so fantastic. Well, listen, Lenny, this is the most amazing conversation. I love talking to you. You have so much positivity, so much energy. You have so many great ideas. It just was really, really wonderful. And I knew when I saw you drinking your cup of coffee on the street next to your office, I was like, who is this guy? And here we are. So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Yeah. And JinJa, I mean it. What I started with is thank you. Thank you for being interested in people of different shapes and sizes and colors and this and that. Thank you for trying to draw out conversations, because for young people, if they can listen to all sorts of people and then make decisions on their journey, it's a super helpful thing.
Love it. So you can all find out more about Lenny's company, SS+K, by visiting ssk.com. And you can also search for Lenny Stern on perplexity.ai, where there's really a very concise sort of description about him and his background. It's really, really cool new generative AI search platform. I want to thank everybody for joining me on the Honest Field Guide podcast, and we will see you next time. The Honest Field Guide is produced by the team at Burke Creative, where brand and multi-channel strategies are designed to help you get attention, grow, scale, and keep up with the pace of change. The music on the podcast is written and performed by Utah Carroll. You can find their songs everywhere online to buy or stream. The opinions expressed on the Honest Field Guide are solely those of the hosts and guests.